Next up, a conversation about AI agent ecosystems in the post-SaaS economy with Ashan at New Relic and Sam at Red Dragon AI.
Okay, so Ashan, I thought we'd get started.
Yeah.
You're from one of these mythical, successful SaaS businesses that hasn't been killed by AI.
That's a great introduction, Sam. I appreciate it.
So perhaps, how about you tell everyone a little bit about New Relic, and then also I'm really curious to hear, like, how are you guys adapting to AI?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. First of all, everyone out there, who knows what observability is? All right, about half. So maybe I'll start with that, and then that might be good to say. So observability essentially is the ability for you to tell you what's going on with your software or your environment in real time, right? And the idea is that you can find problems before problems actually occur, before your customer sees them. That has, because you have real-time information, that has evolved over time to be more than just spot problems. It can spot other application-oriented pieces. It could spot anything from your customer performance, how revenue flows through, if is it being affected by systems, et cetera. So that's a background on observability. New Relic, observability was actually formed or formulated or introduced by our founder, Lou Cerny, a fine Canadian gentleman. And he built the company in 2008, and it started with application performance management. And the reason it started around the 2008 was SaaS and mobile were really popular, and you had to see things and you had to find out things that simple monitoring couldn't, right? And fundamentally what observability is that you put agents in code, it reads the code, it finds out what the code is doing, gets a bunch of telemetry, and then leads you to some answers. Since then, what's happened is, as payloads have moved to the cloud, more cloud observability became really important. And you started to get more than just application. You started to put all of that together, application, infrastructure, how your users performing, et cetera. And that was sort of the second phase of observability.
There was like the microservices phase and stuff like that.
The microservices phase was a big piece. And so we went to application. There's a third phase that's happening now, that's all led by AI and agentic, which we'll talk about in a bit. But so New Relic was sort of the forefront of that. So we're a company that has about 85,000 customers around the world in many different verticals, all small to big. And we're roughly around that billion-ish revenue SaaS company range.
Right.
And SaaS is a big word, Sam, right? SaaS is a big word, so we still think we've got some life in us.
So I'm really curious to sort of hear from you, because clearly you guys are doing well, right? I was making fun with the start, but you're doing well. But not only you're doing well just as a SaaS, you are adopting to AI.
Yeah.
You're incorporating a lot of things, and also you personally are seeing what's going on out there with other SaaS companies. Obviously some of them perhaps are doing AI washing.
Yeah.
Some of them are doing real kinds of things. I'm interested to get your take on that.
Yeah, all right. Maybe I'll start with AI adoption, right? First, what we see, because remember, we see real-time telemetry of actual AI usage, right? So we actually see model usage. We came out with AI monitoring a couple of years ago, right? And we do all of that. We do the NVIDIA NIMs, we do the DeepSeeks, the ChatGPT, et cetera. I will say that we've really seen an uptick in the last 2 quarters. We roughly see AI monitoring up 30% year over year, actually quarter over quarter. That's improving. Now you may say, well, look, we've been talking about AI forever. Remember, we exist in production code, right? So it's not just experimental, it's not in the labs. I'm talking about production, right? So we actually see production AI now in the last 2 quarters. There was a lot of experiments going on, right? But in the enterprise, we're actually starting to see that adopt. What type of AI? All types. I mean, it's mainly, it's predominantly, ChatGPT, the 4.0 model, the 4.0 minis is second. But there's the other thing we've seen is a huge diversity in models. It feels like enterprises started with sort of GPT, but are starting to use a whole bunch of models. We've seen about a 92% increase in variants of models, right, that are being used. So we're certainly starting to see enterprises adopt models.
So that's really interesting. Earlier this morning, we had Matthew from BCG talk about that people weren't seeing the P&L statements actually showing AI sort of stuff. But clearly, you guys are seeing that, and that does seem like a leading indicator for a lot of different things.
Yeah, the question is, how do you measure the effectiveness of this thing, right? Because the use cases are different. If you're in a retail industry versus finance versus high tech, the cases are different. Also, the functionality is different, right? I mean, it used to be, for example, engineering, right? I mean, I talk to a lot of folks, and we'll say, look, about when you have some smaller startups, and there's some out here, I've heard them say something like 80% of my code is software written. If I go to the larger companies, that's really, it's really between about 10 to 20%, right? I mean, that's really the number that we've heard. And the question is, how do you measure effectiveness, right? And there's different, do you measure effectiveness in, if you're a finance person, you want to build a company that has 60% EBITDA. Really what you're saying there is that I can use agents, et cetera, to replace common work. If you're a CTO, you're saying, my measurement is really how quickly can I get product out and with quality, right? So the measurement is, we're still trying to figure out that measurement right now, but it's clearly being adopted, albeit, it is certainly not the hype, but it's past the trough of disillusionment for sure. Yeah.
Do you see that there are new customers, that there are new people that want observability? Everyone's talking about sort of vibe coding, and I don't see anyone going to vibe code an APM platform, but certainly in every organization we're working with, we're seeing sort of the marketing department, the other departments that are not coders, all suddenly making tools, and my guess is they're going to also want observability.
Yeah. And maybe it's a good point, Sam, to talk a little bit about where I think observability is going here, right? So if you look, as I mentioned, the center of gravity for observability was application monitoring. This was fundamentally because of, as I mentioned, right, we moved to SaaS, mobile, et cetera, moved much more towards infrastructure orientation as folks moved into the cloud. That's going back, right? And that's going back to application. Why is that the case? If you think about what observability did, is it helped tell you information about what you're building from an application standpoint. As you became more abstracted from the code, that became more important. Okay, so let me give you, and I'm a little older than most of you in the audience, I think. So when I came out way back in the day, I used to code in C, and then we used to drop into assembler, right, for the DSP. You probably don't even know what a DSP is, I suppose, right? This young audience here, right? But back in the day, but I knew exactly with move, push, pop, etc., what my code was doing. As you started to get more abstracted with the code, and you went to Python, you then went to frameworks like Visual Studio, etc., the coder knew less about the code. So observability, what the code was doing, became more and more important. Now, where the lingua franca of new code is moving to plain English, essentially, you're going to need more and more people, and less technical people are going to start to put more snippets of code. And it's not just that code itself, you're going to get much more snippets of microcode all over the place. Right. How do you observe that, right? And so that's why we think the center of gravity comes back to how do you monitor all those agents, those nano agents, those micro agents, AI-written code, and observability has been a big piece of that. And that's where we think the market's going with observability.
That's very interesting. We've kind of covered, I guess, sort of, observability of AI or observability of agents. Yeah. Another thing that we talked about the other day, which I found fascinating, was the whole idea of agents for observability. Yeah. Can you perhaps tell everyone a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll maybe start with AI for observability and then hit agents in particular, right? So first, what's happened with observability is you're fundamentally curating a bunch of information and giving it to somebody to take action on, right? What's happened is as we become more and more complicated, I have customers as an example, not huge customers. These aren't big customers. These are regular digital native type customers who run a single service through 1,200 microservices today, right? I mean, I have some customers who do that, or a single service that gets through 1,000 microservices, right? So how do you make sense of all of that? So what's happened is you have more and more information, and as a result, there's cognitive overload for the regular person, whether it's the engineer, whether you're DevOps, etc. So that's one problem that we have from a cognitive overload perspective, and AI can help that, right? AI for sure can help that, and you can train it to drag, and you do a whole bunch of things. So AI will definitely help that. The real step, though, is when issues are happening, I want to get to some level of automation, right? Which is what agents are going to...
The promise, yes.
It's the promise. And look, prior to this, I was in the cyber industry, where we try to do automation, like, because if you get real-time attacks, you want to have real-time defense. That was hard, right? And I did that for... unfortunately, a couple of decades, right? I would say, and that was hard. And what we found is narrow use cases fully solved, you could automate. And I think what's happening here is we are going to get to a level of automation. We think the way it's going to work is you're going to have enough information where you'll work in cooperative mode with a human, and then eventually you'll be able to automate certain stuff. So I think the promise of agents in observability is to take some of those automatic workloads and make them happen, right? And that'll democratize it to more people too.
So I know you've got a couple of slides that really sort of show this in action with a new partnership that you've done. Do you want to perhaps show those, and
Sure.
We can walk through those?
Okay, great. So one of the things we did, certainly New Relic, and I think all the observability players are going here, is when we created a single platform, the reason we created a single platform with a single sort of consumption model, so to speak, is to take advantage of the agentic world, right? And there's a couple of things that agents are going to allow us to do in observability. The first is it's going to, what I said, it's going to automate workflows for sure. But the second piece we think is to form deep integrations into the ecosystem, right? When you walk into most of your environments probably have a ton of tools, right? You're using a harness, you're using a GitHub, you're using ServiceNow, you're using a ton of tools, right? And how do you adjudicate with them today? You're adjudicating with pretty static APIs. That's what you're doing, right? Finding single use cases, adjudicating with APIs. Agentic will change that. You guys know that. So we did some deep work with a couple of different players. This one is specifically Microsoft, right? GitHub and Microsoft. So the idea is that if you're a developer developing, I want to know immediately what's going on with my code and fix that immediately and eventually get to automatically without me as a developer leaving my platform, right? Leaving my VS Code platform, etc. So the idea here is that we will have code deployed in GitHub. Then GitHub, if there's an issue detected, we're able to tell GitHub what the issue is, where it is exactly, how to go solve it, and then you as an engineer can solve it, or you can automate that whole process. So let's show you a little bit, right? So, you see this? Yeah, great. You guys see this? It's pretty easy to see. Okay. So, so first, and this is a very specific use case here. So when you deploy code in GitHub, you obviously have it works with GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot, the coding agent, will then pull the code, right? And the reason it pulls a code is then what it can do is through their agent, they inform our agent that this code is being pulled, and then it's going to be merged into production, right? So GitHub pulls a code, it merges it into production, and as it merges into production, that's when we go into action.
So you're monitoring that specific sort of that particular pull request or that particular.
That's right, and we have something called version control. So we can actually see with software markers to see where deployments are done with different versions. And so you've done this particular version, and that's important. So it fires off that change event to New Relic. So what we do is then that triggers a cross-platform agentic thing. So what's our agent doing? So our agent is fundamentally looking at every piece of information we have on our platform. That could be anything from how the application is performing, how the underlying Azure or the underlying AWS structure is performing, anything that we think is relevant to that code deployment. Now, the advantage here, and so it's a set of skills, we call it agentic skills, that we have in our platform that does it. Now, the advantage here is that whenever we add new capabilities, and Microsoft will reply, that is all up to us, right? That is all up to us to give you the best results. We don't rely on a third party to know our APIs, etc. So we're able to then find out exactly what's going on. And there's really three things. Code's running fine. Hey, there's some errors. You don't have to worry about it. But on number three, you've got some errors. You probably have to do a software rollback, right? So we send that back into the GitHub issue page. And the GitHub issues, that's where all the developers pick up their issues. They're able to take action. Now, typically, so that's sort of stage one for us. That's already available, and that's today. What we just announced in GitHub Build was that we're now going to be able to automate not just software, basically a software rollback, right? So you can automatically do a software rollback. That is probably a step that you want somebody in between doing. So what's happening now is the next step that we announced also in GitHub Universe is we're actually able to work with Copilot, tell you exactly which lines of code we're seeing the issue with. Copilot then goes back, corrects that issue, and then gets a version for you ready to deploy again. Pretty amazing, right?
So basically, everyone on pager duty now is going to have a lot more info of actually what went wrong in the thing. That is pretty amazing. Yeah, I actually think that's almost worth an applause.
I'll take the applause.
For me, this is a really good example of an agent actually doing something.
Right.
It's kind of agent I would call a triggered agent that's actually doing something that before would have required lots of people in the middle.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it also, the other thing, it does a few things, right? It does that, it automates that, it gets the speed up. The other big thing is that it brings observability to places where you work, right? And so we're doing the same with ServiceNow. And by the way, in GitHub Universe, we're going to announce a whole bunch of other stuff. I wanted to talk about it here, but Microsoft's not letting me do that. They want to keep it their thing, but there's a lot more coming.
So just quickly, we've only got about 40 seconds left. Where do you see the future of all this? You clearly are adapting to using agents and incorporating them. What do you see going forward?
I mean, this is a really exciting future. I've never been, I've just never been with, and it's just moving so fast, right? And I fundamentally believe that as you start to build all these agentic integrations and pieces, you're going to want to know, just like reasoning, like you're reasoning, you want to know what the agent does. This is sort of reasoning for the infrastructure, right? Reasoning to find out what's going on in your production, and that's what observability will bring. And I feel that's, we're on the forefront of that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ashan. Everyone, Ashan from New Relic.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Sam.